Hello and welcome to IBTimes TV. I'm Leanna Brinded, Business Editor for the International Business Times. Joining me now is Isaac Kato. He's the Executive Vice President and CFO at Verne Global. So hi, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
So in the evolving regulatory landscape, how burdensome are the costs for companies to remain compliant?
Right. Well, there are a lot of components that go into that, of course, and it is something that a CFO has to pay attention to more and more, and that relates to broad-ranging issues from data security to data portability and data privacy, and you know what are our obligations, and a lot of that, of course, also depends on the nature of the company. Certainly, consumer-facing companies have massive amounts of work and costs around that, and yet they need to take those on, because you look at recent examples such as the Target data theft, and it's the kind of thing that can severely damage a company. The CEO resigned today, I bet. So, or I heard. So it depends a lot on the company, of course, but all of those issues around data compliance or compliance with data security rules, data portability, it's a ever increasing issue of significance.
There's been a lot of focus on data management and, of course, regulatory costs. But do you think enough money's been ploughed into cybersecurity?
I think it's hopefully for not too many companies. It's hopefully not a budget issue, but rather a capability issue. I mean, data security is a much more complicated task of managing than physical security ever was. There's no shortage of innovation for the software and the techniques that go into data security, but the people on the other side are every bit as innovative and clever. So fortunately, there's no such thing as perfection. I do think it's a matter of making sure you have the right chief security officer who thinks about data security and who is as contemporary as possible. But I don't think it's for lack of money in many cases as much as it is not understanding what you need to do.
So in terms of mitigating risks, what are your thoughts on internal versus outsourcing for data management issues?
Again, it entirely depends on the company, but I don't think that it's the kind of thing, whether you outsource it to a third-party provider, and there are many very capable outsourced providers, you still have to have someone who ultimately owns the process within the company, and who is on the line for ensuring that you preserve data security.
So in terms of big data, what would you say the top tips are for managing those costs?
When you think about big data costs, there are several common components. I mean, big data is a very broad area, and certainly there are lots and lots of ways that people attack the question, but ultimately the cost buckets break down into a handful of major items. So there's the software, there's the development costs and the people around managing the projects, there's the hardware for both the computers to process the data as well as store the data, and then there's the physical infrastructure, the data centers where the servers actually sit, and the power that goes to run those. And in some cases, I would say things are actually getting better and better, in the sense that the price performance curves on servers just gets better every year. Now, at the same time, data growth is growing exponentially, so people still find themselves spending more, but the amount that you're able to produce per dollar is getting better and better. There are other components, however, which are not so easily controlled, such as the cost of energy of running your data center. Running a 1 megawatt facility, which is large, but for a customer who's 1 megawatt in terms of their IT load, that's a large customer, but there are thousands of companies that fit that profile. They can easily spend £1 million to £1.5 million on electricity alone in a given year to run that stuff. And a lot of these people find that their computer loads are growing by 100% a year. So that's an issue that needs to be managed, and a lot of times people don't necessarily think about it because they're either buying their power as part of an outsourced solution, or the IT department that's promoting the big data budgets aren't really thinking about power. But these days, companies certainly have options of putting their servers in non-traditional locations to take advantage of lower cost pricing, green energy, more stable pricing. So in the UK, Baringa, an energy consultancy, has projected that by 2025, energy prices are going to grow another 70%. So those are major costs to think about.
Over the last year, there's been a lot of wide-scale surveys that have shown that companies are still quite behind in terms of setting up their IT and compliance infrastructure for the new landscape. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Part of the issue is that the available solutions are so different and they're changing so rapidly, and so it's no longer just a case of buying hardware and putting some software on it. I mean, now you have to pick between cloud solutions. You have to decide if you're running it yourself or outsourcing it. I would say people always lag behind compliance because it's the last thing anybody wants to do. And so until there are real penalties knocking on their door, they're not necessarily going to invest in it, but they eventually catch up sooner or later.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. That was Isaac Kato, Executive Vice President and CFO at Verne Global.